Hello, and welcome to Splunk's latest LinkedIn Live Resilience Talks. Today we are moving beyond buzzwords to foster female belonging in cybersecurity, and I'm really excited to discuss such an important topic because without a diverse workforce where we feel like we belong, we know the technology industry is going to be left behind. We always talk about the importance of people in technology. Here's our chance today to really get into it. So although more companies are addressing the gender gap in technology, women still only account for a very low number of employees working in IT. In fact, women make up approximately 25% of cybersecurity roles globally. We're going to explore why businesses need to be intentional in creating a culture that has policies in place to support women and, of course, other underrepresented groups as well. So Jane Franklin is a cybersecurity thought leader, entrepreneur, and author. She is the author of Insecurity, which explores why the numbers of women in cybersecurity have fallen, along with strategies for attracting, identifying, and retaining more women in cybersecurity. So excited to have you here today, Jane. Thank you for taking the time and having a good chat with me.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Kirsty. It's really good to be here.
I think we're going to have a really good discussion. So we know, I've already called it belonging because that's what we call it here at Splunk. It's not just about inclusivity, it's about feeling like you belong. And we know that that's really important in the workplace and it's good for everyone. And the most important element to fostering this kind of successful workforce is driving through these D&I, DEI initiatives that we hear often: diversity, equality, inclusion, and belonging. But particularly in the cybersecurity industry, Jane, in your opinion, how do companies build equitable work environments where women can really thrive? And how important is this to our wider business resilience?
Yeah, I mean, what I want to start with actually is really how important resilience is, to business. And we know when we're looking at this, and specifically in regard to women and gender diverse teams, that they're more productive, they're more innovative and able to stay on schedule and within budget compared to homogenous teams. And furthermore, when women are at the helm of business in leadership roles, not only does GDP improve, but also there's more diversity in the workforce, more contributions to charities, and support of local businesses. And when women are politically and economically empowered, societies are more stable, which is what we really could do with, especially now. But for me, when I'm thinking about women and specifically in cyber, this is where it gets really, really interesting, because it's really all to do with the way that women view and deal with risk. And this really was what my book was about. It was a research project more than anything. And typically when women are in this, well, if we look at women, they're more risk averse, more compliant with rules, and more embracing of organizational controls and technology than men. And they're also extremely intuitive, and they score really highly when it comes to emotional and social intelligence, which makes them and more able to remain calm during times of turbulence. And that's a trait that's required when you've got a major security incident or breach occurring. And so the other thing that's really important is that when cyber attackers, are out there, they're actively profiling the workforce and they're employing strategies that exploit vulnerabilities. And so when we're looking at this and we're considering our workforce, if it's predominantly men, then you know that they're going to be exploiting that. They're going to be targeting men's weaknesses. And so therefore having better diversity is absolutely crucial, as it enables the industry to be more resilient and not so blindsided and susceptible to attacks. But for me, it's like, don't take my word for it. There've been actually there's been good research on this subject. And one of my favorites is from Bayes Business School. And when they looked at this, they actually looked at diversity, and they also looked at women specifically. And they looked at what's happening in regard to risk in banks. And what they found was that having a greater representation of women rather than full diversity, they could actually significantly reduce the frequency of their bank's misconduct fines by around 7.4 million per year. And there's been lots of other studies and research around this. Forrester found that having the highest performing companies actually tied their D&I to their organization, which increased their profits. And Stanford Graduate School also did some research, and they found that tech companies, their share prices increase. And then, of course, when we get gender pay parity, then we can actually add billions to the economy. Tessian, a security company, did some research on this, and they looked at that specifically. I'm not sure how they did their methodology, what their methodology was, but they said that we could add an extra $12 billion US, to our economy, to the US economy, just by having that. So for me, it's really important that we actually include this. And there are several things that we can do in order to achieve that. And I've kind of broken them down into about seven things. And it really starts with a plan. You've got to have leadership engaged. It has to start from the top. And it's got to start with a plan. And you've got to assess your organization, your company, and find out, well, what is actually going wrong? Do we have an issue with attracting talent? Is it retaining talent? Is it both? And so starting with that and doing a gap analysis is where you begin. And then it's really looking at communication, so that you are getting that message across to your internal and external stakeholders. You're looking at branding, all aspects from your organization branding to your team branding, to your individuals branding, so that you're building that awareness and you're spreading that out. And then you're looking at things like talent management and networking and effective leadership and a really inclusive culture rather. So there's so much in there to unpack. But when you look at those things in particular, then you're going to actually do a better job of attracting and retaining women in the industry.
I mean, it's a very complex question, and I'm grateful you gave such a thorough answer, because, how do I build an equitable work environment? Oh, just like this. Oh, well, why didn't I do that before? Of course, it's going to be very multi-layered, very difficult to do, with all these different aspects. I think a lot of what you said struck me in that when we talk about, women, we're not just a homogenous group either. Within women, we have, different representations. We have ethnic minorities. We have neurodiversity. We have a lot of diversity needs within any group. And of course, we're talking about that bell curve, right? We're talking about, if you take the average, of course, you have some women who are more risk averse and some who are much less risk averse. But if we take that kind of average, that's how we see it working out. It's really interesting to me that you have all of these stats, all this research on why it's so good. Why are we still struggling? What do you think we're motivated enough to do this? Is it just a kind of lack of, do people know the stats? Do they need more information, or is it just hard?
I think we're not moving the needle on this because enough activity is not being targeted towards it. And it's almost like the elephant in the room. It would be really nice to say, oh, everything's going, swimmingly. We're doing a great job. And in some ways we are, and some companies are, and some governments are. The Cyber Girls First program, the competition is absolutely brilliant. I mean, they've got something like 65,000 girls engaged with cybersecurity since they began in 2017. But what I'm seeing is really a lack of investment from companies. We have a dire situation in security right now. Burnout is absolutely horrific. The attack surface is growing exponentially. We've got a shortage of skills by all accounts. And so when our leaders are trying to deal with all of this, that's their primary focus. And even though, having greater representation of minority groups, specifically if we're talking about women here, can help with all of those things. It's the absolute foundation. Get your workforce in place, improve the innovation, improve the diversity of thinking. They're still not making time for that. They're still looking at, well, what's happening from a tools perspective, what's happening from a policy perspective. They're trying to get engagement within their organizations. So they're not making time for it, and they're not making that investment, or they're being blocked by others in their organization, like HR. I mean, there's a whole chapter in my book on HR. HR is holding us back. So yeah, it's really, really difficult. But for me, it's because we're not measuring it anywhere. We're really not measuring the progress. And if we don't measure it, we can't improve. And there's not enough investment going on. I don't know what your thoughts are, Kirsty.
Oh, I'm a big believer in you've got to know where you are to know where you're going to get to. So you've got to measure where you are right now to see any improvement. I'm just thinking as you're talking, the parallel between this, which is a huge challenge, huge opportunity to unlock capacity in your organization, and the way that our tech leaders are talking about AI, is a huge, oh, AI, that's a silver bullet that will fix everything. It's been in board conversations, it's been at countless presentations. And yet we're not seeing the same focus on this, yet still has the huge potential to unleash this kind of, we talk about skills shortages, we talk about the need to do more with less. To your point, even if you have female employees who aren't working in technology, it's important that they are brought into the cybersecurity world and culture through initiatives like Cyber First, because they're your employees and they're the ones that may or may not click a link, right? So if they've got that kind of embedded in them, even if they're not working in IT, it's so important to bring along more of this gender parity in terms of technology awareness. That's really what I'm thinking.
Yeah, I mean, I think the stats are 45% of women working in technology haven't come, from having a STEM degree. And it's interesting because I looked at that again just before, we did this just to check, because I know from awards, like I remember going to the Women in IT Awards in London, where you've got over 1,000 people in the room. And I remember one presenter like asking that question, who stand up here if you came from having a degree in technology or STEM. And literally the room, it was filled with women who didn't come from having a degree in STEM. But, when you look at other kind of issues and challenges that we have, whilst this message is, that we put out there, you don't have to come, from having a degree in STEM. We have a shortage of technology professionals and practitioners in our industry. So we've really got to build that. And I think what's interesting, if you talk, or when I talk to the National Cybersecurity Centre, for example, in the UK, they will specifically say, we need more technologists, and some people out there in the industry will say that the message of saying that you don't have to come from having a degree in technology or STEM is actually holding us back. So it's quite interesting to hear the arguments. One thing that I think we have to get better at in our industry when we're looking at this is really being more specific, actually measuring the data, looking at it in terms of the location, the region, and being really intentional with our language and our message that we're putting out there. And there's a lot of work to be done.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think I've heard it described as really, if you're recruiting for someone with 10 years experience in a certain sort of software development language, okay, how useful is that experience from 10 years ago? Whereas you can recruit for kind of curiosity, passion, aptitude, and this kind of mindset of adaptability. It's more important than ever in the technical landscape today, because if you were well trained in something, it wouldn't have been prompt engineering, I can guarantee you. But now that's one of the most sought after skills in cybersecurity. If you have adaptability, you're in there. So yes. Really agree with that message.
Yeah, and I think it's your ability to learn fast as well. We need people who can think well, and we need diverse people in our industry. And that's the key thing. It's just like, how fast can you learn? Because technology is moving so quickly, we're evolving. So how fast can you pick up these skills? And also, I think it's really important that we are building the basics of cyber. Some people will say it's you need an aspect of technology. You need to understand technology or some business before coming into this industry. So it's not actually suitable for entry-level people to have come into our industry without any business experience. So it's really interesting when you go out to the market and you hear from other people. But I've got a question for you, Kirsty, and it's something that I hear an awful lot. So when we're talking about this, often, it's probably the number one thing I hear, it's that we need to build a pipeline. We need to get into the schools and we need to do more work there. And there's an interesting bit of research from McKinsey that actually says that 31% of young women who study tech-based subjects at school in Europe drop out of the pipeline before university. So I'm really interested to hear from you what our business is doing to connect with young women entering the workforce. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, Splunk actually has a T-shirt that says it's not a pipeline problem, and it's a play on our pipe, kind of discussion. But I think for me, this is an age-old kind of myth, as well as we have to be clear on the reality as well as the stats. So I often hear that, we'd love to recruit women, there just aren't any with technical degrees, and it's not true. You could fill your whole organization several times over with the number of women graduating this year alone in engineering, right, in the UK, or any technical subject like that. And I think part of it is a comfort. We're not recruiting because there just aren't enough women. I would really challenge yourself, is your job attractive? Right? If you're describing it as some firefighting, come in at the last minute and work all night in a hoodie and eat pizza and beer, that's not attractive to me. I'm not that kind of technical woman. They exist, but it's not me. So if you're going to describe it like that, a job in instant response, I'm not interested. But if you're going to describe it more of, you're a paramedic helping people recover from this illness or, security incident, and you need a good bedside manner, that appeals a lot more to me as a job. So how can we kind of make sure that we're encouraging people to follow these subjects through? I think a lot of it's in the language. I think a lot of it is also, you're not alone. If you go to university and you study physics, you won't be the only woman in the room, right? There will be a lot of you actually. So between 25 and 40% on these STEM subjects, depending on the course you're taking. So let's try to challenge ourselves and not take comfort in, but I couldn't possibly, there's only one cybersecurity graduate in the whole of the UK or the whole of Europe who's female. I mean, that's not true. So what are you doing to attract that top talent away from other places? There is a pipeline as well, but let's be real, there are women right now who are completing these degrees and are not interested in careers in cybersecurity. We have to ask why that is.
Yeah, because there's a dropout. I mean, McKinsey reports actually shows that it's girls who are finishing education and then going on to choose a degree, and then after the degree, they're not going into those technology roles. They might go into tech, but not necessarily the technology roles. So we've got to look at that. And I really think by going in and telling stories and inspiring individuals, but in this case, we're talking specifically about young women or girls, we've got to go into the schools. We've got to really break it down. We've got to excite them about it and show them what is possible. And I do think we are doing a much better job of that, but we need to be looking at this really competitively. And if we think about our performance. So I was having a chat with someone the other day. She works in technology, so not in cyber, but she was saying that we've only progressed 2%, in the last few years. Now, if you were looking at that from a business perspective, a 2% increase, say in revenue or performance, whatever it is dire. You'd be sacked. You'd be sacked from your job, or people would be asking questions. But yet we don't look at this. In cybersecurity, I think the change has been about 1% within the past few years. So why are we not doing a better job? And
Jane, I think about that leadership culture, right? That you need to have it leaders from the start, from the top. If that was one of your key performance metrics, I guarantee you'd care a lot more, right? Like revenue.
Yeah, this is it, absolutely. And I think it also comes down to the culture. So not tolerating inappropriate behavior, because what we have is a situation where we're losing women. So again, there's good research out there which says that around 50% of women are leaving, after about 10 or 20 years. There's one bit of research that a company did, and they said that women were coming into the industry and 50% were leaving before they were 35 years old. That's not acceptable. What's going on? Why is that happening? We've got to stop that. And I think one of the ways that we can do that is through better leadership, and culture comes from leadership. And that involves things like calling out inappropriate behavior and not tolerating it, and making sure that we have some great policies in place to support not just women, but all people.
Absolutely agree. And I think it's interesting, it doesn't have to be on that very extreme end of harassment and very strong. Often actually that's where HR are strongest, but it's these kind of microaggressions, this lack of advancement, lack of promotion, maybe being diverted out of cybersecurity because soft skills are more rewarded for women rather than men. It can be a lot of things like that that's just very subtly a good attrition on the level of women. And if you're not sure, like look around your own organization and see how many women are there over 35. Is there a huge drop off of 50%? And if so, why? Ask some of those women who are coming up to that boundary. I'm just curious, what would put you off staying here in our company after 35? Ask the women who are still there. Why have you stayed? What did you have to overcome to be here?
I mean, that's completely it. I mean, it's the progression, that retention, which is a real worry. And one of the things that I found is that in some companies, they don't actually know what they need to do in order to progress. So a lot of women are leaving because they're not progressing fast enough. Typically leaders are saying, well, you've not been here for X amount of years, and that's not what they want to hear. So they're not being helped to progress necessarily, and they need that support. And we know that millennials need far more support than other generations that have gone before them, Gen X or the boomers. They need that hand holding, so it's really important that they're really clear, in my opinion, on what is expected of them, and they have that support, things like mentoring, things like sponsoring, so that they can advance. And companies are working really hard to retain not just women, but all people. They've got to do a better job of that.
I think I'm going to come back on hand-holding, because I think actually it's that millennials have a higher expectation in the workplace, right? They expect mentors, they expect sponsors, rightly so, because they know that that's what good advancement looks like. It goes to that belonging. They want more of a feeling, less of turning up for the 9 to 5 in a suit and tie and, with a briefcase and then going back home. I want flexible working. I want things that will work with my childcare. I want mentoring, all this kind of stuff that millennials are asking for. And it's making the workplace better, but it's just kind of table stakes now. If you imagine coming to a workplace without a good mentoring scheme, which actually leads me nicely onto our maybe final question. We've got time, I think, for a lightning round, where I want to ask you for the best kind of diversity, inclusion, equality and belonging policies that you have seen. And obviously at Splunk we have quite a lot, but before I do some spoilers, I just want to ask, what are the best ones that you've seen that have worked really well in organizations?
It's so hard because there are so many out there, but one of the best ones, well, I'm going to give you two actually. Might even give you a few more.
Go for it.
One I really like was one that was adopted or shared with me from the National Cybersecurity Centre in the UK, and they had a policy of not tolerating inappropriate behaviour, but it actually went so far as if you witnessed it and you didn't report it, then that was reprimandable. And I like that because a lot of the time people are frightened to report. There can be consequences of that. They don't feel safe to report. So that was really good because that improved the culture and that made people feel more safe. And the other one that I really like is really at the beginning of the hiring process, when companies have a policy to really remove gendered language on job descriptions and use blind CVs, structured interviews and work sample tests for that first stage of the interview process. And by doing that, research actually suggests that specifically blind CVs can increase the chances of women being hired by 25 to 46%. So those are just a couple, but there are so many great policies out there. The important thing for me is that they're not just written policies, they're actually implemented and enforced.
I think that's fantastic. I mean, at Splunk, we've got a range of things. We are expanding our inventory of DEIB learning for all employees, which is great. We get a kind of email every week. It takes 5 or 10 minutes. So it's always top of mind, but it's not kind of, this day-long training where you're clicking through, this is harassment, this is not, this is discrimination. It's much lighter touch than that, and actually very thoughtful, which I really appreciate in terms of training. We have diversity, inclusion, equality and belonging in all our critical processes. We have health and well-being benefits as well, which can really help with some of those additional needs that some employees have, and providing a lot of flexibility, for people to balance private, personal work lives. I think that's really critical today as well.
It is. People want that flexibility. It's just like, where can you work from? Is it the remote flexibility that you want? Is it the 4-day week? Is it the 9-day fortnightly week? You know, whatever it is, I think that is the key. And it's obviously got to work for your business, but it's really important.
Absolutely. I think we are coming to the end. That was good to finish on a lightning round, hopefully some inspiration for some people who've been listening with us. We just want to close on a kind of call to action here, because I think we all recognise it's a big problem. We all recognise that there are real benefits in not just resilience, but actually in your whole culture, the happiness of your workforce, frankly, their willingness to show up and do a good job for you. There's so many reasons to improve this. But I would say, as a call to action, you know, I'd really encourage everyone on this call to go and ask some of the women around you about their personal experiences. And they don't owe you their time, and this is not their job. So if they're willing to share this with you, be grateful, be generous in listening, but just to understand, you know, have you seen this dropout? Is this a problem in our organization? What's been a problem for you? Is there anything I can take on and champion and help be an ally with? And make sure that that's a safe culture where people can tell their stories. Jane, do you have a final kind of call to action for people listening, things that they can do as soon as this call finishes?
Yeah. If you're a woman, get visible. And when I say visible, I mean, you know, show yourself, reveal yourself, and use your voice. It's so important for women to do. It's one of the top things that you can do to advance your career. There's visible work and there's invisible work. So go out and start getting visible, and you can do that in numerous ways, whether that's in your organization or whether that's externally, probably mostly through social media and things like that. So and get support, because a lot of women will feel frightened to do that, or they will put it off and not make time to do it. So get some support. You know, if you're worried about that, go and get someone to peer review like what you want to post, but get visible, please do, and push your voices out there. We need more role models. We need more visible female role models. We have amazing role models in our industry. We just need them to be more visible.
Yeah, and it's really tricky as well to kind of hype yourself. If you're able to find a friendly colleague or someone who will post for you, right? Hyping. I just did a fantastic LinkedIn Live with Jane Franklin. What an incredible person to work with. Maybe that feels more comfortable than you saying, I just did a fantastic LinkedIn Live and aren't I great? You know, so co-hype each other as well if that feels more comfortable at the start. There's lots of ways to be more visible and encourage that better culture and amplify the conversation, right? That's what we're here to do today. So it's been an absolute joy. Thank you so much for joining me. Really great to have you here, Jane. Such an esteemed guest to have with us on this series of resilience talks. That's all we've got time for today. But thank you to everyone listening and joining as well. And we'll see you again soon.
Thanks so much, Kirsty.
Bye.